You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 88, Speaking Hindi. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. Today, my guest, Jessica Kumar, host of the Invisible India podcast, joins me to talk about Hindi. In this episode, she tells us how an opportunity to work abroad in India completely changed her life. She talks about her journey with the Hindi language, including why devanagari script makes learning Hindi much easier than it might appear to be. Jessica talks to us about the kind of Hindi spoken in Bihar, where she lives with her husband and kids, and how it's different from Hindi spoken in other cities. We talk about the other languages that influence Bihari Hindi, the kinds of foods she loves cooking in India, and even how the many languages in northern India are used amongst one another every day. Big thank you to Jessica for this conversation about Hindi and giving us a glimpse into India's beauty. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Jessica. How are you today, Jessica?
Hey, Ella, I'm doing fine. I'm really glad to be on.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we had this opportunity to sync our schedules and have the conversation. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Sure. So those that know me know that I'm Jessica Kumar. I am a Midwestern American white lady who kind of grew up in a pretty homogenous environment. I did not have a lot of exposure to other cultures until I went to college. I also really didn't have much exposure to a lot of different languages besides the typical Spanish that we learn in the U.S. In high school until I moved to India for an internship. And at that point, my love for languages kind of ignited. And I would say specifically that I have a real love for Indian languages. So I learned fluent Hindi in my 20s, and I'm continuing to, I always say that people are like, oh, wow, you've learned Hindi, complete Hindi. I'm like, no. There's always more. There's always more. And especially such an ancient language, and all of the languages derived from Sanskrit are just incredibly deep and have so much historical knowledge between and how they all connect to one another. So there's no one that could claim to be a true expert, especially someone like myself who is a foreigner and just learned in their adult life. So Hindi, I would say, is my second language, but English would be my first language. And I would not even consider Spanish to be like a second language for me anymore because I've forgotten so much having lived in India. So
Yeah. So the burning question I have for you is, you had an internship in India in college, and I think that's so awesome because especially growing up in the US, or I would say growing up, but like also living in the US, I feel like so much is very Eurocentric. And I think it's really fascinating to me that you had an opportunity to go to South Asia for this opportunity. So how did that come about?
sure. So my dad is an international business person and worked a lot in Asia when I was growing up. So a lot of his work was in China, Korea, at that juncture in the early 90s, when there was a lot of development happening in the sectors he worked in. So I always had this thought that I definitely want to work in international business in Asia, but I didn't exactly know. I always thought that I would be in Korea or something. I had this vision of myself with like a briefcase. How typical this is now. Like, professionals don't do this anymore, but I had like my nice blazer with like a skirt suit, walking down some, down the streets of some big metropolitan Asian city with a briefcase and high heels. That was like a vision of myself. Mm-hmm. Oh, how different things turned out. Now professionals literally wear sweatpants, in our home offices, and yeah. And then I ended up in India, which, last time I wore high heels, I'm pretty sure I would have broke my ankle, trying to dodge things in the road. But that being said, I really had this passion to work in international business. And so a recruiter came to my university at the time and was talking about these different opportunities. And these were more after graduation, because the internships were more long-term. So they were more for like a year or longer. And at that point, I wasn't ready to commit in college. But then after I graduated, I committed to a year internship. And then I ended up staying on and becoming an employee. And I worked for them for 4 years. So that was part where my journey began. And also in the early 2000s, everything was India, China. I think that's what everyone was talking about. Let's, India, China is the next developing, mega powers and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, well, I don't want to miss out on that. So that was something interesting to me that I wanted to be a part of. I studied marketing and economics.
Yeah. So you're perfect to get in that business world and have that opportunity. When did you speak Hindi? What, I guess, were some of the initial like steps that you took toward learning the language? Like I'm assuming that you were there and you felt like you had to learn it. Or did you feel like you had to learn it?
I didn't have to learn Hindi actually for my job. My boss highly recommended to me that I learn. However, I was not required to do that. And where I was working was actually somewhat of a smaller town in northern India. So it was not required for me to do this whole learning. I could do my job in English, but the relationships and getting to know my colleagues, understanding their stories, living in their community, I really felt that this was really important for me to be able to understand them and their stories and really be able to understand the context where I was living. So I started this program, and it was like a GPA approach, the growing participator approach, and a very immersion based. It still exists. It's called OSLS. It only exists in India. And they only right now, as far as I understand, have learn Indian languages through English, through Spanish, and a while ago they were working on doing it through Korean, but I'm not sure if that developed. So I did that track, and that worked well for me and my personality. I really love people. I'm very outgoing. I like to just throw myself into a situation. I don't mind being embarrassed. So it was a perfect situation. It was a perfect kind of approach for me. And I used to think that was the only approach, but now I see that so many other people have different ways that they learn, and maybe more book-oriented, more academic-oriented. So anyhow, I did this growing participator approach, and it was a really helpful and step for me to launch into the lifelong journey, which would be learning Hindi.
How was that process like? Actually learning the words, learning the grammar, learning the alphabet, learning all of that comes with Hindi. Like, what were some of the things that you encountered along those initial days, weeks, months?
Yeah. I would say it was about a year and a half that was really focused I would say full time. I would say that I was actually learning the language. I was also working part time, but so much of my office dialogues and relationships were also happening in Hindi, and as I was learning, so I was kind of, I was working, but I was also able to do language learning while I was working, immersing myself in some ways. So I wasn't living in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, any of these large metropolitans. So people were, at least 15, 16 years ago when I was there, living there in that town, they had this internship. People were really willing to just speak Hindi with you. So that was easier. It's easier. It was easier then, actually, than it is now. So some of the challenges or interesting things that came across, I think that Devanagari script is very intimidating if you look at it. But once you dig in, it's actually very straightforward and very easy. Even my kids will say, my son is learning to read now and English, and he's like, well, why does C should make a k sound? I'm like, well, C makes like a bunch of different sounds, and in Devanagari it's so simple, ka or ja or cha, whatever. It makes the same sound every single time. What is written there is what it is. That is just what it is. It's straightforward. If you read it exactly like it's written, 99% of the time, that is how people say the word. So it's just kind of, I always tell my kids, Hindi is easier than English. Reading
Hindi.
So
many things are easier than English.
That's true.
English is hard.
It's crazy, yeah. So anyhow, I would think that Devanagari script was one of the more intimidating things, but actually that's really crucial to get pronunciation, because there's just some words, or there's some sounds that in Hindi that are not made. We do not make them in English. So you have to really kind of reorient your brain to learn those sounds.
Yeah. Is there anything that maybe you learned later on in this journey that you wished you had known at the start or towards the start?
I had really good coaching, so I'm not sure. I think a lot of people really helped me out to be able to succeed in the way that they knew that it would work for me. So I don't know. I would have to say that I don't think so. I think that as far as the language, there's a lot of cultural things that I wish I would have done differently. But as far as the language aspect, I think that the people who guided me and helped me out really kind of gave me a lot of, I was standing on their shoulders and their mistakes. So that really helped. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, how about culturally? Is there anything that...
So many. I talk about this a lot on my podcast, but one of the most challenging or almost unavoidable things is, I was living in a smaller city, and I'm a single in my 20s foreigner. And, I grew up I have 3 brothers. I'm very comfortable just being around guys. It's just nothing. There's nothing weird about that to me. And there's no reason to me that any guy would ever misinterpret my intentions. So I had some just struggles with that, because in Indian culture, if a girl talks to you, that in certain contexts, that means that she's definitely interested in you. And so I had so many dumb things, and I actually was trying to keep that in mind. But I had just so many misunderstandings with people because, I was going to buy a blender at the grocery store, and I had to order it in advance, and so I had to talk to the guy, and then I had to give him my number. But then I maybe was too nice to him at the store, so then he starts calling me on my number. I was like, I wasn't giving you this so you could call me. I was giving you this so you could order, so I could get my order. And it's not like he was being creepy, because he honestly thought that I was talking to him a lot, and it was just a cultural misunderstanding between the two of us. And as me being a foreigner in his context, I was at fault, right? Like I should have known. if you go to another country and you're going to be living in someone's country, you shouldn't, I don't expect them to accommodate to me, right? I need to learn the cues and the social norms. So I would say, you know, I had so many misunderstandings when it came to those little kinds of things. And now being married, now it's so great because I feel like, you know, I'm also older now too. So, and I have kids. So people are like, oh, she's really friendly. And it's like, yeah, it's because I'm, you know, that's just how I am. I am not interested in you at all. It's just how I am. I'm happily married. I have kids. Like, I'm old. Like, don't bother me, you know? So
Hindi is spoken over a wide area of India and in almost every part of the country by a little people, by a lot of people. I don't have numbers in front of me, but it is a national language. So I'm really curious to know, like, how have you noticed Hindi changing from different parts of the country? Is there a way that maybe Hindi is spoken in one city and maybe it's not spoken this way in like a big city? Or is it spoken differently in small towns than versus like how does it change?
yeah, great question. This could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but let's let me just try to focus on one thing. First of all, I want to say that, you know, I'm not Indian, and so I'm not trying to represent India or get any political in talking about India in any way. So, but there are certain parts of India where Hindi is not widely spoken, and there's a lot of tension because Hindi has become a very dominant language because of Bollywood and because most of the prime ministers have been from North India because that's where the majority of the population lies. It's become politicized a little bit, Hindi. And there are a couple of other languages, particularly Tamil, which is widely spoken in South India. So Tamil
Right.
is also a very strong and very ancient language. And so there's kind of this... And also Malayalam, I would say. Malayalam is also a very ancient and strong language. This is so different from Hindi that there's just there's nothing in common with these languages. You wouldn't even understand a single word between the two. So a lot of people who are Tamil speakers don't speak Hindi unless they've lived in North India and vice versa. Same with people from Kerala who speak Malayalam. So there is some tension there. But your second question, how does Hindi vary across North India? Very widely. So I can just share my own personal experience. When I was living in this one part of India for my internship, that was in Uttarakhand, one state, right north of Delhi. So there's a lot of Punjabi people there. And so it was a little bit influenced by Punjabi language. And there's also a number of other languages from the hill people we call like the Bihari, the mountain people that have more mountainous, live in the mountain regions. And they have their languages, Garhwali, Kumaoni. Okay, so it's like influenced by those languages. And so you would mix a lot of the vocabulary, even the accent, the speed of speaking, the tone, the phrases. So, and then of course Delhi Hindi has its own kind of thing, and that's what people would call like standard Hindi would be.
Okay.
Is like Delhi or northern India, Uttar Pradesh, that area. So moving to Bihar, or actually not even before I even moved to Bihar, my husband is originally from Bihar, and the first time I remember talking to my mother-in-law on the phone, I could not understand her. She's speaking Hindi, but I could not understand. It was very challenging for me to make out what she was saying, her accent, her tone, the vocabulary that she used. I was having to repeat multiple times. Abhishek's whispering in my ear, oh, she's saying, what kind of sari do you want to wear for the wedding? And blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, I completely didn't catch that. So now that I've lived there for several years and have known my in-laws now for 13 years, now I also speak Bihari Hindi. So I have to adjust myself when I go to other states because people make fun of Biharis in the way that they speak Hindi. It's like a different accent. It kind of sounds like what people would call like hillbilly type of language. It sounds more it sounds more rough or uncultured in some sense. And that's just a stereotype that people have. So people also speak at a little bit of a louder pitch. And it's not everyone, but this is kind of the village. It comes from the village. So people speak very loud. People speak very, have a nice flow to their language. We go up and down a lot. Like, for example, if you were in Delhi, it would be, aap kya kar rahe ho? And then if you're in Bihar, it's aap kya kar rahe ho? And it's like you kind of cut some of the things, and you're on a roller coaster. Aap kya kar rahe ho? And it ends on a kind of up down.
Interesting.
So it's just kind of I don't know how to describe, but it people do label it kind of as a hillbilly type of Hindi.
Do you think it's common at all for people to not understand one another? Or are there just like certain pockets of places where people maybe have this kind of stereotype of like, we don't understand what they're saying, or I don't know.
I think a native speaker would be able to pick up enough of the nuances in between to figure out what they were saying. So, for example, when I watch something where they're speaking in Old English, I love the the Much Ado About Nothing film, and it makes me so happy because it makes me realize that actually I'm really fluent in English and at a native level that I sometimes get discouraged in Hindi. I'm like, I'm so tired of not being completely, understanding everything. And so then I listen to movies like this, and my husband's like, what are they talking about? Because there's all of these strange terms in Old English, or these poetic, like Shakespearean English that you just kind of get, growing up here and reading Shakespeare and taking all the English classes. And then for him, he has very, 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 very strong English, but he's still like, there's still certain things that he may not understand from that very antiquated kind of. And so the same thing would be for non-native speakers of Hindi. There are these kind of nuanced old terms that are sometimes used, and a native speaker would be able to pick those up, but someone who learned later on like me wouldn't.
With the other languages that are spoken around, because we know there are so many spoken in India, but other languages that maybe border this area, either in Bihar or in that Hindi belt in the northern India region. For you, as someone who learned Hindi, are you able to communicate in any of the other languages that are spoken, or is there any intelligibility that you're aware of, or have you learned any other of them?
Sure. Great question. Yeah. And I'm just to say, I really appreciate how much you've dug in to, India is such a complex place. And I know you interview people from all different language groups. And so I really just appreciate having not been there or lived there, or that you really, you don't, not like you need my validation, but, you just really have a good knowledge of India. So, bordering Bihar is a place that does have several languages, although people kind of outside of Bihar lump everyone into Bihari Hindi, when actually Bihari Hindi is actually influenced a lot by other languages. So Maghai, Maithili, Angika, and the one that's most well known is Bhojpuri, because they make films in this language as well. And so this is a language spoken in Bihar and in part of Uttar Pradesh, a bordering state. Okay. So Bhojpuri is kind of, other people like to make fun of it quite a bit. And some of the movies and songs are also really kind of suggestive. And so, and also in a very funny way. So it's kind of, a lot of people outside of Bihar, or even Biharis himself, will kind of make fun of Bhojpuri. So I myself can understand, if I'm speaking with someone from a day-to-day conversation, I can make conversation with Bhojpuri or Baghai. Those probably the two.
Okay.
And then my mother-in-law speaks Angika. That's her back. My father-in-law and her, but they don't speak it with each other. They speak just Hindi. But their Hindi is influenced enough that I have vocabulary, picked up vocabulary from that. But I'm not going to be able to like 100% keep a conversation in that. But I could
Okay.
speak with anyone who's a Methili speaker or a Bhojpuri speaker and follow what they're saying. So yeah, there's so much to learn. So much to learn.
Where do you see I'm going to put myself in this situation because I want to be here too someday.
Mm.
But where do we see mixing of these languages in a city like Bihar where there are, there's a multitude?
It's really hard for me to say. I mean, it's kind of in. I can just give you like situational. I can just give you like situational, like anecdotal type of things because it's really everywhere.
Okay.
So in the news, it's in media and in news, I would say it's more segregated. It's like this is the Hindi channel. They try to speak 100% Hindi, and then but most people don't speak that way. So let's not forget English. So people mix English so much into everything, and even in ways that don't make sense. So, for example, I'm using my mother-in-law as an example because she's just the cutest and hilarious. So she has used the word take, Take, right? And she has created her own meaning to take. So she has said, वो उसको टेक करना नहीं आता है. उसको टेक करना नहीं आता है. So this person doesn't know how to take her. I'm like, what are you talking about? This person doesn't know how to take her. I was like, take her? This person doesn't know how to handle? Is that what you mean by this? This person doesn't know how to manage, how to deal with this person's problems, this person's emotions, this person's health challenges. So she's used this word take and she's applied her own meaning to it. And we're like, what are you talking about? So, and then she also says this other things like, वो घर का main person वो है. So she's used the main person. She's got that main person. The main person is the house, is that person. So she's saying like, this is the patriarch or that's the matriarch of the family. But she's saying main person. So we're like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean the main person? Like, so she has, like, this happens all the time. And then of course there's certain words that are used the same in English and they're used here, like phone, computer. I find it interesting in India because we've like I'm saying like India has absorbed so much English as just even as a part of their own native languages. And it's not like that in China. It's not like that in Brazil. It's like there are like Chinese words for everything. There are Portuguese words for everything. Even new technologies that come up, like there's new words for that. In India, people just use the English word. Like, usko heart attack ho gaya. He had a heart attack. आप कंप्यूटर खोल के उसको डाउनलोड कीजिए. Open your computer and download that thing. It's like
right.
There's all these, especially when it comes to medical, when it comes to technology, when it comes to a lot of modern advancements and stuff, there's just really a lot of English words used. And that's one way that, it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah, I think that's interesting for me because my only exposure to Indian culture has just been through cinema and television shows now. There's so many on Netflix now, like just TV shows, and it's wonderful. And I I have a like just personal thing. I love to watch international programming, but if I don't know the language, I have to just sit in front of the TV and watch it because I have to read the subtitles. And I'll notice occasionally in a Bollywood film that there will be stretches of times where they're speaking in English, and then there'll be stretches of times they're speaking in Hindi, and then occasionally they'll switch to another language that they're talking to a shopkeeper or if they're talking to their parents or a potential suitor. So I guess that's why I asked that question, just trying to get an understanding of like in a multilingual city, area, region, is there any kind of like stratification for like when you would use a certain language to talk to a certain person? Is it a matter of like, if you're trying to impress your boss, maybe you speak, a certain language, or if you're trying to impress your future mother-in-law, you speak in like, in a different language. So, but I guess yeah, that's kind of how it is, I guess.
Great question. And this is something that, I think an Indian person can answer better than me, because although I have, living there, you have to pick up on the nuances of these things. So I think when I was first new, I was just trying to speak Hindi with everyone. And sometimes people would get a little offended because they're like, what do you think? I don't know English. So
Mm,
that's a thing I have had to be careful about, and learning when to apply it and what level to apply it. So yes, absolutely, there are a lot of differences. And even my children have picked up on these. So whenever there's a shopkeeper, or you're in a restaurant, or, if it's a small shop or something, you can use Hindi, because that's most likely the level of education that the people have. They want to speak in Hindi. They might not know English. And that's just totally acceptable. That's the default. But if you're in a job interview situation, if you are at an airport, if you are in a place that's you just have to gauge by the person, honestly, of where you are and what the situation is, and how much English to use and how much Hindi to use, and then how to use it. So I've noticed even my children know exactly when to apply this and when not to. So they know when to speak English, they know when to speak Hindi, and then how to speak. So it's really interesting because this is something that I think it is very, very natural. It comes naturally to Indians, and it's something that I had to learn later on, right?
it's just fascinating to me. It's just fascinating to me how much vibrancy there is in like the language and the culture on the same level in
Mm-hmm.
India.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really looking forward to going someday.
And the language is so much, supporting the culture
Hmm.
and holding it. And we
Absolutely.
all, everybody knows that language and culture are, one and the same in the one, and they all are interconnected in a way that we can't dissect. But especially when it comes to understanding how complex India is, because there's so much history that's still alive, but there's so much modernity which is also existing. So some anthropologists and whatnot have said that there's 10,000 years of living history happening in India right now. So
Wow.
if you're an IT professional, you are, let's just use like a very, famous Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Let's just use it for
Hmm.
example, right? He's Tamilian. The same, I don't know if he's married or not. I don't know this much about him, but he in his marriage ceremony, there will be chants chanted, or there must have been chants chanted that are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. The same chants for thousands of years that have been used, the same rituals used in his marriage ceremony. And that here he is, like he's, you want to talk about modernity and advancement and innovation. Like he's the CEO. Like the largest companies in the world.
Right.
So it's like you want to talk about modernity and how all of this stuff is coming together, but holding on to the ancientness as well. And then when you go to more rural areas of Bihar and stuff, people are cooking on mud stoves. They could have an electric stove if they wanted, but this is how they want to cook. This is the most accessible, most easiest way for them to do it. And it's just amazing. And this is the stuff that like people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. But then two
Hmm.
steps away, you've got like the most modern technology in your hand, like a mobile, or you can download, Netflix on your mobile phone, and you can watch a program from anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
So it's just really crazy. Like you'll see that contrast in India. You'll see a humongous, gorgeous bungalow with all these just absolutely, state of the art stuff. And then next to them, there's like a slum with people literally like, cooking on a wood fire. It's like,
Right.
this is the
Right.
contrast of India, not only economically, but, culturally as well. And it's just really fascinating.
Yeah. My brain can't comprehend that. I think
It,
it's one of those things that like I have to go see it
you have to go see
because
it.
just thinking about it, like the magnitude of it just is like I'm speechless. I'm
There's a
speechless.
magnitude. I mean, I would say the first 9 months for me, like living in India, was every day I had these moments of I just could not wrap my mind around it. And even now, I've been living, on and off for 16 years. Sometimes I'll have these moments where, I was in my apartment and I have my own little, I'm speaking English with my husband. We're I'm wearing shorts inside my house because nobody can see me. It's hot, whatever. I'm feeling myself. I'm doing my thing. And then I open the door and I look out and there's a massive, uh, like slum right next to my house. And it's
Mm,
like people have chickens running around. People are hanging their clothes over the wires. And it's like, not only the economic differences are there, but just the cultural, how much how the things that I'm worried about and the things that I'm thinking about and the things they're worried about and the things that they're thinking about are not the same thing at all. The
hmm.
way they see the world and the way that I see the world could not be more different. But yet here we are, just a few steps away from each other.
Right, right.
That's not just because I'm a foreigner. This is a dissonance that is with, wealthy Indians as well. But
Hmm.
people have just kind of learned to live with that dissonance and live with this is the reality of life and this is just what it is.
So for people like myself and other people who have not been to India and are not ethnically Indian, South Asian, um, if that day should come where we have an opportunity to visit beautiful India, lovely country, what are some things? And I guess you know, being that you are from the U.S., what are some ways that you think that people like us can respectfully engage with the culture in whichever region that we happen to visit, move to, interact with people from? Like, what are some things that you think would be respectful and helpful?
Well, being this is a linguistics podcast, what I'm going to say first is, dig into the language as much as you can,
Hmm.
wherever you are going to be. If you're going to be in Hyderabad, try to work on some Telugu when you get there in an intentional way. And don't be surprised when people just want to speak English with you, no matter where you're from in the world. If you're, from an Arab country, if you're from Korea, if you're from the Caribbean, if you know English, people are going to want to speak English with you. That's just kind of, if you're a foreigner, that's the default is let's speak English. Unless you're in a place where there are a lot of tourists that are from a certain area. For example, like Goa. If you ever go to Goa, you can find people that speak Russian. You can find people that speak Finnish. You can find people, any people who vacation there from Europe or other parts.
Hmm.
Probably you can find people that speak Malay. You can find Indians who've accommodated to the tourist, uh, made this a real tourist attraction and be able to speak the different languages. So, yeah, I think, digging into the language is the number one thing. And then I always have, I have a list of people on my website of different vendors or things that I recommend. So if you're going to go on a tour, I would recommend using Wool Voyage. It's Wovoyage. We can put it in there in the show notes or whatever. Like people that are companies that are tour companies that are run by Indians that know what they're doing. That's a women-owned travel company, for example. Things like that are people who are really doing amazing work, have ethical businesses, and kind of engaging with those, doing your research ahead of time. Of course, I not to do a shameless plug, but I talk quite about this on my podcast. If you're first time to India, what are the things you need to know? What are the things that you need to prepare yourself for? And the Traveler's Guide. Read whatever you can. There's some great books out there. The women's, what else? The other one. My friend Cheryl Maharana had also written a book about traveling fearlessly in India as a woman. There are resources out there. So just checking what those ones are, and knowing the ins and outs of how to behave, I think is really important. And because it is very different. It's super different from traveling in Europe. It's very different from traveling in even Latin America, even Southeast Asia. When you go to Thailand and India, it's a completely different animal. So it's just, India is its own very unique place, and you got to know the specifics ahead of time. So I hate to be general because I feel like this is a whole podcast in its own.
I was going to ask you about this, but since you mentioned it, tell us about your podcast. What do you talk about, and how you got started, and tell us where we can listen to it.
Yeah, so it's the Invisible India podcast, and I call it the Invisible India podcast, not because I'm, as a foreigner, I'm trying to show some light on India, but it's about what are the lesser known aspects which people may misinterpret or not know about as much. And I talk about my own cross-cultural experiences, being married to an Indian, living in India as a foreigner for many years, learning the Hindi language, interacting with many different kinds of people. And then also the main focus for 2021 was I had all guests of South Asian origin on the show. So people who are experts in their field, whether that they're an author, whether they're like a religious influencer, whether they're an organic farmer, whether they're education professional in the education sector. I've tried mostly to interview people who are doing some kind of good for Indian society. So I'm not like, oh, I want to interview the biggest tech tycoon I can. Like, yes, you're making an impact on society, but you get a lot of attention already. Who are the people that aren't getting a lot of, who are doing incredible things, but aren't getting a lot of, accolades for it? So those are some of the folks that I have on the show. And I talked about adoption as well, like interviewed transracial and transnational adoptees that were either from an Indian background, South Asian background, or South Asians who adopted outside of India. So just kind of the cross-cultural element of India is basically what the show's about. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, as far as the social media, but the show itself is everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. The website is invisibleindiapodcast.com. So that's where you can find us. I have a newsletter. I share all kinds of stuff with recommendations, businesses that I love, discounts that they're providing, and stuff like that.
Awesome. That's great. I will add links to all of those in the show notes for this episode so that those of you listening can reach Invisible India right away. So you're away from India right now. So this is a good time to ask you this question. What are you looking forward to the most when you return?
Well, I can't decide if it's more the food or if it's being able to speak Hindi every day without making it a big effort. So I don't know. I think, we make Indian food here. Right now I'm in the US for several months. It's not the same. It's just not, it doesn't taste the same. So when we bring all the masalas and stuff from India, still, like, the potatoes in America are disgusting. Potatoes in India actually have a taste. I don't know. I see you gasping.
I say this all the time and people don't believe me. So I feel like you have validated this thing that I've been saying forever. Food in America is not that good.
It's not.
It doesn't taste like anything. Like, people will tell me, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I'll just make this really brief. People will tell me, oh, I hate tomatoes. They're disgusting. I hate tomatoes. And I look at them and I just say, that's because you haven't had a tomato. If you go to Italy, if you go to Spain, you slice a tomato, put a little salt, a little olive oil on it.
It's a meal.
You have died and gone to heaven. You can't do that with tomatoes here. They're terrible. They're just like sacks full of water. And it's just like, oh, anyway, please continue.
Food in America, as much as you try to grow a tasty greenhouse tomato, it's not going to be the same as one grown from your garden, or one grown from, like, actually the ground somewhere, like real earth. Not
Mm-hmm.
knocking it. I love that I can get everything in season here. It's great, but it's just, I mean, let's not even talk about fruit. I don't even want to bring it up because it'll make me cry. But like, once you've had a mango
Oh my God.
from India during mango season, you will never, I will not buy mangoes in America. It's like when I have like a mango, like I won't like get mango smoothie. It's like, that is not real food. Like that is garbage. No. And no offense to, you know, the
Big
amazing
mango.
farmers in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico or in Florida or wherever that are making these fruits, trying to meet our demand up here in northern states where like nothing grows. No offense to them, they're doing their best, but like, no, it's not gonna happen. So the fruit and stuff. I mean, I'm enjoying all the berries right now. I'm like strawberries and blueberries because we don't get those in Bihar that much ever. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, give me all the cold weather fruits, cherries, berries, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
apples, everything else, I'm not even gonna touch because it's not good. My kids, I have a whole pile of bananas sitting. They go bad every week because my kids are like, these taste like chalk. I'm like, I'm not gonna make you eat these. You're right. They're gross.
Wow.
So the food, obviously, and of course, being able to speak Hindi easily, just anywhere, here, there, and everywhere is obviously a huge privilege of living in India. And you have to force it here. You have to really make it happen
Mm-hmm.
here. Force it in your house. I actually pay my kids extra allowance if they speak Hindi during the week. Like, if you speak Hindi for a half an hour at dinner, I will give you money.
Aw.
I don't want them to forget. I don't want them to
Yeah,
forget.
yeah, yeah. Um, you said a word about the food. I'm a little stuck on that because I really think like, I agree with what you said, like no shade to the people who are actually growing stuff and making a living, an honest living for themselves and everything, but it just really puts into perspective how like far our food comes from in the US.
Yeah.
Since you are looking forward to the food when you return, what are some things that you enjoy eating?
Oh, well, I don't. Oof, oof, man. Okay, so I prefer vegetarian food. That's just kind of my jam. And I really, people like crazy about the street food in India, which I get. But I don't have time to risk being sick. I got 2 kids. I got a job. I got all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know. I did the whole foodie like experience, street food experience when I first moved there and puked my guts out and whatever. Like you just have to do it, right? Your body, it has to
Mhm.
acclimate. But I'm not. I don't have. I'm gonna be 40 like in a couple of years. Like I don't have like time for that anymore. I cook a lot. We cook a lot of stuff at home. So some of our favorite, I mean, I love pani puri. It's like a golgappa. This is little mini puris fried, and they make them in a globe shape, and you poke a hole in it. You put mashed potato and like garlic and onion, and then there's this like spicy tamarind water that you and salty and spicy, and you dip it in there. It fills up like a little bowl, and you pop it in your mouth, and you eat
Wow.
it in one bite. It's intense and it's amazing. That's my favorite. It's a street food, but it's something we just make at home because it's worth it. It's so good. My favorite. I always joke around that every white American that I know likes Palak Paneer because it's
Mm.
like cheese and it's like spinach and with naan, white naan, right? Like roasted. So I prefer like paratha, which is, like a stuffed paratha with radish inside. I always joke around. This is my favorite is like muli paratha and palak paneer. Those two combination. It's like a lot of greens, some root vegetable, vegetable, oil, butter. Yes, salt and spice.
What is the difference between palak paneer and saag paneer?
So palak is actually spinach, and saag is any kind of green. So it could be like sarso saag or whatever saag could be like. Saag is like could be any kind of green, like mustard green or collard green. It could be a mix of different kinds. And palak is spinach only.
I have been misinformed because I thought I thought that saag paneer was just spinach. Um, but maybe
It
that's
can
how
be. It can be.
Yeah.
Saag
Yeah.
paneer can be, but it's probably, if it's written saag paneer, it's probably a mix of some, could be spinach and something else that's like cheaper probably. And they package it and give it to you. Yeah. So
Okay. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. What is in Bihar? Is there a like signature dish of that city that or that region? Like the one that like people say, my auntie makes the best. No, my auntie makes the best, and like people kind of go back and forth over.
yes, it's called litti choka. And
Mm.
it is roasted gram flour. So it's like chickpea, but it's roasted. And then it's ground into a flour. And it's called sattu. So it's like this kind of a little bit bitter, but very grainy and coarse flour. And so you take white flour and then you make a little ball. You stuff it with this sattu. And then you roast it on the fire with like tons of ghee, like clarified butter. And then you also make a cholka, which is basically mashed potato. Let's just call it mashed potatoes with a bunch of masala in it and chopped up onions, raw onions, and or it could also have eggplant in it.
Mm.
So really good. You eat that two together. You kind of break the roasted ball, litti, and then you dip it in the cholka and eat it with your hands. It's quite good. When it's hot and fresh, it's quite good.
Oh,
But yeah, everyone talks
spicy
about
or
that.
don?
Spicy.
Okay, I want to try it.
It'll be hard
Is
to
there
find in the States because there are not many Biharis, but you can usually find a lot of Gujarati foods because Gujaratis kind of dominate the grocery industry and fast food type of Indian fast food in America. There are a lot of Gujaratis, but finding litti choka is going to be tough. I've never seen them.
Okay.
You have to make friends with the Bihari and go to their house.
That's
you can come to my
on
house.
List. I'll be there. I'll be there. Is there anything else that maybe you want to mention or anything else I haven't had a chance to ask?
Well, I would just say that, one of my goals in 2022 is create more Hindi learning resources. So 2021 was let's feature people of South Asian descent on my show. That's what I want to do. 2022 is all about creating Hindi learning resources. So that's one of my goals. And I have a free download on my site, which is like the guide for kids Hindi learning. And I'm going to be creating more stuff, but it's invisibleideapodcast.com. And then I have a bunch of downloads and offers and stuff, Hindi teachers and all that, which is also on my site. People that I recommend and have talked to personally.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, happy 2022. And I look forward to seeing what your learning resources, how they turn out, and looking forward to seeing those come to light. I think that's amazing, especially for kids.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to end each episode with the same question, a bit of a fun one. Do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, or words of advice in Hindi to share?
I'm going to do a really simple one because this is a very well-known thing among Biharis, and it's easy to remember. So a lot of times when people are surprised, here in the States, people say like, "Oh my, no way." People will be like, "Oh crap," or "Oh my God," or like, "No way," or "I can't believe that," or "Shut up," or so for all of those things, "Oh my God," like all of those things, we have one phrase we can use, and that's "Bop re bop."
I love that.
Bop re bop. And it's like, bop is like your father. So it's like, and re is the thing that people say all the time, like, re or re. It's like a very Bihari thing. It's very simple. It's nothing complicated. It's just bop re bop. And you have to say it like that. You can't be like bop re bop. It's like bop. Your eyes have to go and your mouth, your face has to go bop re bop. Or
so it's like bop re bop.
Bop re bop. And if you say that, people will be like, you are a hillbilly. If you ever say that in front of your friends, Hindi speaking friends, and someone's like, "Oh, did you watch Indian Matchmaking?" You're like, oh, "Bop re bop. I loved that show." They'd be like, "Where'd you learn that?"
I love that. Thank you for the
The
local answer
local.
to this
The
question. This is
local.
awesome. I
It's
love
kind
that
of
one.
like it would kind of be like a it's like a hillbillyism kind of how people would you would never hear like a Bollywood actress or anyone on a news channel saying like boppity bop. Like they
Mm.
no they would be like no.
Jessica, thank you again so much for this conversation. I had so much fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ella. Appreciate it so much. It's good. Good
Before I
talk.
let you go, if we are in Bihar and we've just been having this conversation for all this time and we're going our separate ways, what would be the best way for us to say goodbye?
Usually people, I mean, and if you read all the language books, it'll be like namaste, but like people do say that. It depends a lot. If it's me and you, we're two women roughly around the same age and the same status, like it would just be like chaliye theek hai fir milenge, like okay, let's go, talk to you soon, talk to you later. If you're addressing an elder, it would be like pranam. Let's say you were my auntie or something, I would say pranam, and I would touch your feet, and I would leave. If we were in person or if I'm on the phone, I would say pranam, pranam, multiple times, once, whatever. And then your response would be kush raho. If you're an elder and you'd be like, be happy, or it's giving me a blessing. So it really
Oh,
depends on the context. It really depends on how casual you are. In our context, two women casually chatting with one another, then I could, just say, chaliye, theek hai, fir baat karenge, or okay, good, let's talk again soon.
can you teach me that?
Sure. It's fir milenge, which
Fir
like,
milenge,
or we'll meet again, or it's fir baat karenge, we'll talk again.
fir baat karenge.
Fir baat karenge, talk
Okay.
again.
Talk to you soon, Jessica.
ठीक है, फिर
Bye.
मिलेंगे, बाय.